Tonight, no near solution or even an explanation as to why you will continue to dig deeper into your pockets to get by, as two key cabinet secretaries pass the buck over who should be explaining the high cost of living and the ever-increasing cost of energy. Petroleum and energy political heads of ministries John Munyes and Charles Keter were no show in Bunge today, but on Front Row tonight we will try and get answers for you. Who will and should take responsibility for the current state of affairs? Is it Parliament? Is it the regulator? Do we blame poor governance or government policies? We will be diving deep into the cost of living for Kenyans. And of course, you can be part of this conversation tonight. Thank you for joining us. This is Front Row. I am Akisa Wandera. And of course, the hashtag to use is Front Row. And we are asking you, who or what is responsible for the high cost of living? Who or what is responsible for the high cost of living? At Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE. The hashtag once again, Front Row. And of course, our text line is open, 22155. I'll be taking a number of your views. And you will be able to call in at some point in the show just to be part of this conversation, because we're talking about you and I and our pockets and why life continues to get difficult for Kenyans. Now, let's take a look at who we have tonight on the show. Irene Otieno is an advocate of the High Court. She's involved in promoting good governance and tax justice in Kenya. With more than 10 years' experience in development work, Irene is a governance, public sector management and public sector reform advocate. Her work interests are on the empowerment of citizenry through the provision of accurate information and citizens raising their voice to demand accountability. Irene Otieno is a regional coordinator of the National Taxpayers Association, joining us for this conversation here on the Front Row. We also have Odhiambo Ramogi, who's an economist with 15 years experience in enterprise development, financial advisory, banking, financial inclusion, SME financing, insurance and investments. Currently, he is the CEO of Elim Capital Limited, a Nairobi-based consulting firm. And the two will be helping us dive into this conversation on the cost of living. And of course, with an entry point of the high fuel prices and uproar from Kenyans that has been sustained for some days now, who will get us out of this mess? They will be attempting to respond to some of these questions. And of course, the burden of taxation on the common man. But first, let's take a look at a story one of our reporters here worked on. In its latest review on fuel prices, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, removed the subsidies of 7 shillings and 10 cents on petrol, 9 shillings and 90 cents on diesel, and 11 shillings and 36 cents on kerosene. Lawmakers want the Cabinet Secretaries for Petroleum and Energy to explain why the subsidies were stopped. Let's take a look at that report.
In its latest review of fuel prices, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, removed the subsidies of 7 shillings and 10 cents on petrol, 9 shillings and 90 cents on diesel, and 11 shillings and 36 cents on kerosene. Lawmakers want the Cabinet Secretaries for Petroleum and Energy to explain why the subsidies were stopped.
That subsidy is not necessarily sustainable because it relies on income from the fuel levy. And if you keep the prices suppressed, then obviously there's no income. And my considered opinion is that that fuel levy has now run out and the prices have to revert back to the original pricing formula.
The fuel subsidy kept diesel and kerosene prices unchanged since April at 107 shillings and 66 cents and 97 shillings and 85 cents a litre, while petrol had remained unchanged at 127 shillings and 14 cents since June.
The pricing formula that is being used now in terms of trying to put subsidies, in my view, is not sustainable in the long term, especially if the prices continue going up and the government doesn't have enough revenue to be able to sustain the subsidy.
And even as the members of parliament go head-to-head with the cabinet secretaries, the question remains, who will bail out Kenyans from the miasma of high fuel prices?
Almost 50% of the value of fuel is as a result of levies and taxes. If you reduce a lot of the levies and modify the taxes, you will actually find that the fuel cost in Kenya would be cheaper than in Uganda and Rwanda. But at the moment, because of the additional loading of levies on the fuel, the price is much higher. Now, why is the price that high? Is because the government, the executive, requires income from some source. But that income is required to fund something else. So the legislature is also increasing a lot of the costs of the legislature itself. So the issue of pensions going up, the issue of salaries going up, the issue of allowances going up, the number of sittings, etc., all that is funded from the government.
Brenda Kerubo, KTN News.
And really, that's a very good point to start from. And we are also getting comments from you on the same, on really who is to blame for the high cost of living that is currently being experienced. The rise in fuel prices has a ripple effect in various facets of our economy, as we're just about to find out as we speak to our experts here. So then it's just a matter of time until we see the cookie really crumble, worse than we have already seen in the past. And we're already talking about electricity prices going up. And of course, it's from a result of this. Looking at where Kenya finds itself in this, and we're now seeing the baton of blame being shifted around. Parliament says it's not us. The CSSA are refusing to show up for grilling. How did we find ourselves here?
Thank you. It's also wonderful to be here. No, it's the blame game is very unattractive, and it's an ugly sight to say the least. One, because actually everyone takes the blame for it. Parliament approved a law that increased VAT on fuel, a law that the President and the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, lobbied on, so that now at the end of the day we had a law that did not take into consideration the welfare of the public. So they cannot shift the blame to anyone else. Even right now, what they are doing is just for the gallery. But at the same time, also, the ministers that are responsible are supposed to look into the policy framework of energy in the country. They seem to not know what to do around the issue of fuel, because ultimately there will be a ripple effect. As long as you increase the price of fuel, there will be a ripple effect in the economy.
In everything, talk about transport, talk about manufacturing, various sectors in the country. And the taxpayer, Irene, and I'm glad that we have you here tonight from the National Taxpayers Association. The tax base in the country, the common taxpayer, you and I are already feeling overburdened by taxation, right, left, center.
Yeah, that's true, and happy to be on the show today to discuss this issue that is pertinent to taxpayers generally. So indeed, the burden of taxation, and we can evidently see it because even of how it has been ventilated. We've seen people moving to court. We've seen a lot of feedback from citizens, either on social media, an expression in other ways. So indeed, it's a key problem, and I'd also would like to associate myself with the comments from my colleague mentioning the role of Parliament. So when you do have the Parliament, they need to ask the critical questions prior or even anticipate. So within the discussions at the Finance Committee level, as we are passing this legislation, what type of feedback is the committee giving on these proposals passed from Treasury? So it's indeed important that we move and shift our government's appetite to increase revenue and shift them to look at the net effect. So it might look, and I've seen KRA very excited when they launched their 8th corporate strategy, and they're still keen on adding revenue, and what they're saying is that they've collected enough revenue, but there needs to be a querying of what has that effect of an increase in revenue done to production and you know, the economy at large.
But looking at that, and specifically on fuel, it would appear that KRA and a lot of economists have said are reaching out to the lowest hanging fruits, like fuel. Now we are talking about a digital service tax. What are your thoughts on that?
Two things. First, I think we must also look at what is happening regionally within all the African tax administrations, and also what's happening at the developed countries level. So there's already discussion at the developed country level where they're saying there's need to tax the digital space. There's need to look at introduce things like the minimum taxation. So a lot of the things that our Kenya Revenue Authority is applying is also being informed by what is happening regionally and internationally. However, there's need then to look at our context, because within our context, a further question is, when the tax is taken in, how is it applied? So we are looking at two issues, I think, that are critical to the taxpayer. Is the tax raising mechanism fair? Do we perceive it as fair? And secondly, when you're applying this taxation, where is it going to? And I would like to comment on the issue you raise on the low-hanging fruit. I would say government and Kenya Revenue Authority are really taking the low-hanging fruit and are not creatively looking at how to get revenue from the sector. We as an institution have been able to conduct a research on sovereign wealth fund as a case study that other countries have done. So as opposed to really increasing the tax on petroleum products and the likes, are we looking at issues like the sovereign wealth fund, which would then have the companies themselves, to some extent, put into, have a fund so that if there is a fluctuation of prices and everything, you don't have to immediately tax citizens. But of course, the push, when we look at what has happened today, and that some of the key people we expected to make a presentation before Parliament did not show up, you look at the fact that probably they're looking at the space. We've already mentioned that there is the high debt that we must service and pay as a country. So that is another reason that we view as an institution is driving the higher taxation. So if we also need to scrutinize the underlying rationale on why government would seek to overtax its own people, some of those key ones are the excesses of the government and the debt conversation.
The debt conversation, and we're coming back to pick it up from there, and our economist here will be really trying to break that down for us. The amount of debt that we have accrued over time and the payment right now, we're talking about a GDP ratio of about, what, 71, I think? 71%. So in every 100 shillings, 71 shillings goes to payment of debt. What does that make us look like as a country? And we're coming to respond to some of those questions. Remember, we're asking you, who or what is responsible for the high cost of living? At Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE, the hashtag is FRONTROW. This is your show too, so we perhaps love for you to indulge us, and of course, so with the experts here in studio, understand some of the parameters and why we're getting ourselves as a country here, and perhaps what are some of the things we will need to consider to get out of the hole that we find ourselves in as a country. Let's take that break.